In the vastness of the desert, where each grain of sand seems insignificant, lies a secret that could redefine your understanding of purpose. A wisdom so profound, it has the power to change not just one life but the world itself. Will you discover what it means to truly matter? The sun was beginning its descent over Galilee, its rays stretching lazily across the horizon. The disciples had spent the day walking, their sandals caked with dust and their robes damp with sweat. They had stopped near the edge of the desert, a vast and seemingly endless expanse of golden dunes. Peter, ever restless, paced along the edge, his brow furrowed with thought. The vastness of the desert before him stirred something deep within, an unsettling question he couldn't ignore. "Does it ever make you feel small?" he asked aloud, his voice carrying across the still air. John, who was seated on a rock nearby, looked up from where he was absently tracing patterns in the dirt. "What are you talking about, Peter?" Peter gestured toward the desert. The desert, it's so massive, so endless. We're like specks of dust in comparison. I can't help but wonder, do we even matter? Does anything we do truly make a difference?" Andrew, crouched beside a small bush, straightened up and nodded thoughtfully. "I've wondered the same thing before. The world is so vast and our lives are so short. It's hard to believe that our small actions could have any lasting impact." The others, overhearing the conversation, slowly began to gather. Their expressions revealed similar doubts, fears they had kept hidden in their hearts. Before anyone could respond, a voice rang out, clear and calm. "Come, my friends. Sit with me." All heads turned to see Jesus standing a short distance away, his figure bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. His face held a serene smile, and his outstretched hand beckoned them closer. The disciples settled themselves in a half-circle around Jesus. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of the desert, dry earth, distant shrubs, and the faint tang of salt from a nearby sea. "Peter," Jesus began, his voice carrying a mixture of compassion and authority, "you speak of feeling small, of wondering if your life holds meaning." Peter looked down, unable to meet Jesus' gaze. "Yes, Master. I see the vastness of this desert and feel insignificant. Like I'm just a tiny speck in a world too big to notice me." Jesus knelt beside Peter, picking up a handful of sand. He let the grains slip through his fingers until only one remained, which he held up for all to see. "Do you see this grain of sand?" Jesus asked. The disciples leaned forward, squinting at the tiny speck resting on his fingertip. "It's so small," James murmured. "Yes," Jesus agreed. "And yet, it is part of something much larger. Without this grain, the desert would not be the same." The disciples exchanged puzzled looks, trying to grasp the meaning of his words. "What do you mean, Master?" Peter asked, his voice tinged with both hope and confusion. Jesus smiled and settled into the sand, gesturing for the others to do the same. "Let me tell you a story," he said, his tone inviting and full of promise. "There was once a vast desert," Jesus began, his voice weaving an image in their minds. "It stretched as far as the eye could see, its golden dunes rising and falling like waves on a sea of silence. Each grain of sand believed itself to be insignificant, lost among the countless others. They did not understand their purpose." The disciples listened intently, their imaginations painting the scene Jesus described. "One day a great wind swept across the desert," Jesus continued. "The grains of sand were lifted into the air, thrown into chaos. One grain in particular was carried far, far away, soaring over mountains and rivers until it landed in a lush valley. What happened to it?" Thomas asked, his skepticism momentarily replaced by curiosity. "At first, the grain felt lost and abandoned," Jesus said. "Separated from the desert, it believed it had no place, no purpose. But time has a way of revealing the truth." The disciples leaned in closer, their eyes fixed on Jesus as he spoke. The grain became part of the soil, mingling with the earth. From that soil, a seed took root and a mighty tree began to grow. Its branches reached toward the heavens, offering shade to travelers, homes to birds, and fruit to the hungry. As Jesus' story came to a pause, the disciples exchanged thoughtful glances. The imagery of the grain of sand stirred something within them, something familiar and unsettling. Peter broke the silence, his voice tinged with frustration. "Master, I want to believe that I have a purpose, but it's hard. I'm just a fisherman. What can I possibly do that matters in the grand scheme of things?" Jesus turned to him, his gaze gentle but firm. "Peter, the fisherman who casts his net into the sea does not see every fish he catches. Yet each fish sustains a family, a village. Your actions ripple through the world in ways you cannot always see." Mary Magdalene, who had been sitting quietly, spoke up. "But what if we fail? What if we're not strong enough to fulfill our purpose?" Jesus looked at her, his expression filled with compassion. "Mary, even the smallest seed can grow into a mighty tree. Your faith, no matter how small, carries the power to change the world." The disciples fell silent, their doubts slowly giving way to a quiet sense of hope. That night, as the disciples rested, a sudden wind began to stir. It swept through the camp, carrying grains of sand into the air. The storm grew stronger, the wind howling as the disciples huddled together for shelter. Peter sat apart from the others, his thoughts churning as wildly as the storm around him. He watched the sand swirl in the moonlight, each grain caught in the chaos of the wind. "Master," he whispered into the night, though Jesus was nowhere in sight. "If I am like a grain of sand, how can I possibly make a difference?" As if in response, the storm began to calm. The wind softened, the air growing still once more. Peter felt a strange peace settle over him, a quiet assurance that he could not explain. The next morning, Jesus gathered the disciples once more, leading them to a hill overlooking the desert. The rising sun bathed the landscape in golden light, casting long shadows across the dunes. "Look out upon this land," Jesus said, gesturing to the desert. "Each grain of sand plays its part, no matter how small. Together they form something vast, something beautiful." He turned to the disciples, his eyes filled with warmth. "You are like these grains. Alone you may feel small, but together you have the power to shape the world." Peter felt something shift within him, a stirring of hope, a spark of purpose. Here is the continuation and expansion of the grain of sand, following the established narrative style and deepening the story with additional layers and subplots. Over the days that followed, the disciples began to ponder Jesus' words in their hearts. Each of them was struck by the message of the grain of sand, though they processed it in their own ways. Peter, now deeply moved by the story, found himself reflecting on his own actions. One evening, while walking along the shore of Galilee, he encountered a young boy struggling to untangle a fishing net. "Here, let me help you," Peter said, kneeling beside him. The boy hesitated, his eyes wide with surprise. "Thank you, sir. My father says I'm too clumsy to fish, but I want to learn." Peter worked quietly, his calloused hands deftly repairing the net. "We all start somewhere," he said gently. "When I first began fishing, I tore more nets than I caught fish. But with patience I learned. And so will you." As he handed the boy the repaired net, Peter saw the gratitude in his eyes and felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. Perhaps, he thought, it wasn't about grand gestures but small acts of kindness. Mary Magdalene, too, found her purpose reaffirmed. One afternoon, while traveling through a nearby village, she encountered a grieving widow sitting by the roadside. "Are you all right?" Mary asked, kneeling beside her. The woman shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "My husband is gone and I have nothing left. No food, no home. I'm lost." Mary reached out, taking the woman's trembling hands in her own. "You are not alone," she said softly. "Come with me. Let me help you find rest." The woman looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and hope. In that moment, Mary understood the power of simply being present for someone in need. John, ever thoughtful, struggled with doubt. During a debate with skeptics in another village, he found himself challenged. "How can you believe that your faith matters?" one man scoffed. "The world is full of suffering. Your small acts won't change that." John's heart wavered, but then he remembered Jesus' words. Taking a deep breath, he replied, "Even the smallest light can drive away the darkness. I may not change the world alone, but together we can create something greater than ourselves." The disciples' newfound understanding was tested when they came upon a village stricken by drought. The land was cracked and dry, the fields barren. The villagers, thin and weary, looked at the disciples with hollow eyes. "Master," Andrew said, turning to Jesus, "what can we do? We have so little to give and these people need so much." Jesus smiled gently. "Even a single grain of sand can anchor an entire desert. Give what you have and trust in the Father's plan." The disciples hesitated but obeyed. They gathered their food and water, small as it was, and began distributing it among the villagers. At first it seemed impossibly meager. But as they shared, a miracle began to unfold. The baskets of food and jugs of water did not empty. There was enough for everyone and still they remained full. The villagers, seeing this, fell to their knees in awe. "Who are you that such blessings follow you?" one of them asked. "We are servants," Jesus said simply. "And the Father provides for all who trust in Him." In the days that followed, the village came back to life. The disciples stayed to help repair homes, tend to fields, and share their teachings. Each act, though small, began to ripple outward. One morning, a young girl approached Peter with a flower she had picked. "Thank you," she said shyly, "for helping us." Peter knelt to accept the flower, his heart swelling with emotion. "It's not just me," he said. "We all help each other. That's what makes us strong." The girl smiled, her eyes shining with newfound hope. Meanwhile, Mary Magdalene organized the women of the village to rebuild their marketplace, teaching them how to weave and sew goods to trade. John worked with the children, telling them stories of faith and courage. The disciples began to see how their small efforts combined to create something much larger. As the time came to leave the village, the disciples gathered around Jesus one last time. The morning sun cast long shadows across the land, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming wildflowers, a testament to the village's renewal. "Master," Peter said, "I think I understand now. We don't have to do great things to make a difference. Even small acts can change the world." Jesus smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "Yes, Peter. Like the grain of sand, your life may seem small, but it carries infinite potential. Alone, a grain may feel insignificant, but together they form deserts, nourish valleys, and create mountains." He knelt and drew a small circle in the sand, placing a single grain at its center. "This," he said, pointing to the grain, "is you. And this," he gestured to the surrounding grains, "is all the lives you touch." The disciples fell silent, their hearts stirred by his words. "Remember this," Jesus said, rising to his feet. "You are never alone and you are never without purpose. Each of you has a role to play in the Father's plan. Go forth and let your light shine." As they began their journey, the disciples carried Jesus' message in their hearts. The desert no longer seemed vast and empty, it was alive with meaning, each grain of sand a reminder of their own significance. And so, their footsteps marked the sand, each step a testament to the power of love, faith, and the infinite potential of even the smallest soul. This is end of the story. Comment Amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.